What if I told you that one of the most significant questions in modern royal history wasn't about affairs, scandals, or even abdications? What if the most private matter involves two innocent children and a woman who claims she's been erased from their story entirely? Right now, as you're watching this, there's a woman sitting somewhere with a collection of documents that could potentially challenge one of the most carefully constructed public narratives of our time. She's not asking for fame. She's not seeking attention. She's asking for something far more fundamental, acknowledgement that she exists. This woman, who we'll call DL to protect her identity for now, isn't just claiming she helped Harry and Meghan become parents. She's making a far more significant claim. She says she is the biological mother of Archie and Lilibet, not a surrogate who carried someone else's genetic material, not a hired helper who played a supporting role. She claims those children came from her eggs, grew in her body, and were born through her labor.
To be in the line of succession, they have to be born by Meghan Markle. It has to be Prince Harry's child. They can't use a surrogate. And so people are saying, we deserve to know if these children are in the line of success.
And if that doesn't make your head spin, here's what should. She says she has proof. Now, before you dismiss this as another conspiracy theory, let me tell you what makes this different. This isn't some anonymous internet poster making vague accusations. This isn't a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. This is a woman who claims to have signed legal documents, who says she has hospital records, financial transactions, and most importantly, non-disclosure agreements that she now believes were breached by the very people who promised to protect her. Think about what this means for a moment. If DL is telling the truth, then everything we've been told about these children's births is a fabrication. Every photo of Meghan with her growing belly, every interview where she talked about pregnancy cravings and morning sickness, every moment where Harry beamed about becoming a father, all of it would be performance art on a scale that would make Hollywood jealous. But here's where this story becomes particularly noteworthy. DL isn't just making these claims in a vacuum. She's making them at a time when there are already questions, already people who have been analyzing footage and photos for years, pointing out inconsistencies that never quite made sense. Remember those moments during Meghan's pregnancies when eagle-eyed observers noticed something odd? The way her belly seemed to shift or fold in ways that didn't seem natural? The unusual angles she held her body? The way she sometimes seemed to forget she was supposed to be heavily pregnant? At the time, these observations were dismissed as nitpicking, as people looking for problems where none existed. But what if they weren't wrong? What if their instincts were picking up on something that was always there, hiding in plain sight? DL claims she knows why those moments felt off. She says she was watching from the shadows, seeing someone else get credit for carrying children that came from her body. She describes the surreal experience of watching Meghan talk about pregnancy symptoms while DL herself was dealing with the real physical and emotional challenges of actually being pregnant. According to DL, the arrangement began in late 2017, when she was approached through an intermediary connected to a high-end fertility clinic in California. The clinic had a reputation for handling delicate situations for celebrities and wealthy clients who needed absolute discretion. The initial conversation, she says, was straightforward. A prominent couple needed help starting their family, and they were willing to pay generously for both the service and the silence. The terms seemed reasonable at first: complete anonymity, substantial compensation, and legal protection for all parties involved. DL says she was told this wasn't just about carrying someone else's biological children. The couple specifically needed someone who could provide the genetic material as well, due to fertility challenges that couldn't be made public. She describes being told that the arrangement would be handled with military precision. Every detail would be managed, every potential leak would be prevented, and her identity would be protected forever. The compensation package, she claims, was structured to ensure her financial security for life, with payments beginning immediately and continuing long after the children were born. But then something changed. According to DL, the moment the first child was born, communication began to break down. Phone calls weren't returned, emails went unanswered, The carefully managed relationship that had been maintained throughout the pregnancy suddenly became cold and distant. DL says she initially tried to be understanding. She assumed that new parents were simply overwhelmed and would eventually honor their commitments. She gave them space, stayed quiet, and waited for the situation to normalize. But weeks turned into months, and the silence continued. The compensation that was supposed to continue flowing stopped abruptly. The legal protections that were supposed to shield her seemed to evaporate. Most painfully, she says, she watched as the public narrative about the children's births was carefully crafted without any acknowledgement of her existence. She describes the surreal experience of watching news coverage of the births, seeing photos of Harry and Meghan with their newborns, and feeling like she was watching her own life being rewritten in real time. The children she claims to have carried and delivered were being presented to the world as if she had never existed. What makes DL's story particularly compelling is the level of detail she provides. She doesn't just make broad claims about being involved. She talks about specific dates, specific locations, specific people who were present during key moments. She describes the layout of the hospital rooms, the names of medical staff, the exact timing of procedures. More importantly, she claims to have documentation for all of it. Hospital admission records that show her presence during the times when the children were allegedly born. Financial records that show payments being made and then stopped. Email chains that discuss the arrangement and its terms. And yes, those non-disclosure agreements that she believes were violated when she was cut out of the picture entirely. But perhaps the most explosive element of DL's claims involves the birth certificates themselves. She alleges that official documents were altered or created to remove any trace of her involvement. She points to the unusual changes made to Archie's birth certificate, where Meghan's full name was replaced with just her royal title, as potential evidence of document manipulation. Legal experts who have reviewed DL's claims privately say that if her documentation is authentic, it could create unprecedented complications for the royal family. The British monarchy has specific rules about lineage and succession that date back centuries. These rules weren't written with modern fertility treatments and surrogacy arrangements in mind. If the children weren't born to Meghan, and if proper legal procedures for surrogacy weren't followed, it could potentially affect their place in the line of succession. Their royal titles could be called into question. The very foundation of their royal status could be challenged. But the implications go far beyond legal technicalities. This is about trust, about the social contract between the royal family and the public. People have invested emotionally in Harry and Meghan's story. They've supported them through controversies, defended them against criticism, and celebrated their journey as parents. If DL's claims are proven true, it would mean that this emotional investment was based on a fundamental deception. It would mean that moments of apparent vulnerability and authenticity were actually carefully rehearsed performances. It would mean that the couple who positioned themselves as truth-tellers were actually constructing one of the most elaborate lies in royal history. The timing of DL's decision to come forward is also significant. She claims she remained silent for years, hoping that the situation would eventually be resolved privately. But as Harry and Meghan's public profile continued to grow, as they gave interviews about their experiences as parents, as they built a brand around authenticity and truth-telling, DL says she felt increasingly betrayed. She describes watching the Oprah interview as a turning point, hearing Meghan talk about the challenges of motherhood, about the support she received and didn't receive, about the isolation she felt during her pregnancies. DL says she felt like she was watching someone else claim credit for experiences that were actually hers. The decision to go public, she claims, wasn't about revenge or money. It was about acknowledgement. After years of being erased from the story, after watching someone else receive credit for her contributions, after having her existence denied by the very people who had promised to protect her, she decided that silence was no longer an option. The royal family's response to these emerging claims has been telling in its absence. There have been no denials, no clarifications, no attempts to address the allegations directly. The silence from both the Sussex camp and Buckingham Palace has been deafening. This silence is particularly notable given Harry and Meghan's history of responding quickly to stories they consider false or misleading. They've issued statements, filed lawsuits, and given interviews to counter narratives they disagreed with. But on this matter, there's been nothing but quiet. Some observers interpret this silence as strategic, suggesting that any response would only give more attention to claims that might eventually fade away. Others see it as an indication that the allegations might have merit, and that legal teams are working behind the scenes to address the situation. The impact on Harry personally appears to be significant. Sources close to the couple describe him as increasingly isolated and stressed. Friends say he's become withdrawn from social situations, reluctant to make public appearances, and constantly worried about what might emerge next. For someone who has spent years talking about the importance of mental health and emotional well-being, the psychological toll of this situation must be enormous. If he was involved in creating this deception, the guilt and fear of exposure would be overwhelming. If he was somehow deceived himself, the betrayal would be equally devastating. Meghan's response has been even more dramatic. For someone who built her public persona around communication and engagement, her complete disappearance from public view is unprecedented. She's canceled appearances, avoided social media, and reportedly declined interview requests from major outlets. This retreat is particularly significant given her history of using media strategically to shape narratives and control her image. Her silence suggests either legal advice to avoid making statements that could be used against her, or a recognition that the situation has spiraled beyond her ability to manage through traditional media manipulation. The broader implications for the monarchy are equally serious. The institution has survived scandals, divorces, and even abdications. But this situation is different because it strikes at the very heart of what the monarchy represents: legitimate succession and authentic lineage. If it's proven that deception was involved in presenting these children as naturally born to Meghan, it would raise questions about what other aspects of royal life might be manufactured or manipulated. It would undermine the trust that the institution depends on to maintain its relevance and support. The human cost of this situation cannot be overlooked. Regardless of what the truth ultimately reveals, real people are being hurt by this controversy. Children who had no say in the circumstances of their birth are at the center of a global scandal. A woman who claims to have been erased from their story is fighting for acknowledgement of her role in their lives. Harry and Meghan, whatever their level of involvement or deception, are watching their carefully constructed new life potentially crumble around them. The isolation, stress, and uncertainty must be overwhelming, especially given their history of discussing mental health challenges. As this situation continues to develop, the questions multiply rather than decrease. How long can the silence from all parties continue? What will happen when DL's legal team begins releasing documentation? How will the royal family respond if the evidence becomes overwhelming? The clock is ticking, and everyone involved knows it. Documents can be authenticated or disproven. Witnesses can be interviewed and cross-examined. The truth, whatever it is, will eventually emerge. What happens next could reshape not just the lives of the individuals involved, but the future of the monarchy itself. If deception on this scale is proven, it would represent a betrayal of public trust that would be difficult to recover from. The woman known as DL has made her choice. She's decided that silence is no longer an option. That acknowledgement is worth the risk of exposure. That truth is more important than protecting the powerful people who may have betrayed her. Now everyone else involved must make their choices. Continue the silence and hope the story fades away? Come forward with their version of events? Fight the allegations legally and publicly? Whatever they decide, the world will be watching, and the truth, whatever it is, will eventually emerge from the shadows where it's been hiding for far too long.